For our next presentation, we are doing a great presentation on using human intelligence to manage human risk. I think being in cybersecurity, I don't know about you, I come from the social sciences, and don't get me wrong, I love my tech folk, but sometimes I'm like, what if we use evidence-based research and all these other beautiful, rich fields of study like psychology and human behavior change to help us achieve our goals and empower all of our users and our teams and ourselves. And we have Corwin Tobias, who is coming up, and he's going to be talking about knowing the human and using emotional intelligence to manage human risk. But whenever you're ready, we can go up and away.
All right. So my name is Corwin Tobias. I'm the Information Security Awareness Ambassador at Yonder. And today I want to talk about knowing the human and specifically using emotional intelligence to manage human risk. All right. So this is a quote by Dale Carnegie. When dealing with people, remember you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. And I think, when we think of security awareness training, it's really important to remember that logic is something that does help us make decisions. But at the end of the day, emotion is a huge driver for why we do what we do. I make decisions on a weekly basis, not just based on logic, but also based on emotion. And I think when we think about our organizations doing the same thing, that emotion is a huge driver in what we do, we start to reframe what we do when it comes to security awareness training. And, one of the things that I've discovered, and I think this is common across the board, is that our cybersecurity departments are often seen as the department of no. I was having a conversation with someone in a podcast recording a few months ago, and he talked about how the head of the cybersecurity department was nicknamed Dr. No because he would constantly shut down different initiatives across the organization due to cybersecurity concerns. And in our organization, I was asked to write a blog about our cybersecurity department and kind of connecting to the organization. And from that conversation I had regarding that podcast, I thought of emotional intelligence. And so a lot of this presentation is actually drawn from our organization's response to some of the changes and information and focus on emotional intelligence and how we've been able to combine that to better serve our organization as a cybersecurity department. And so launching out this blog that looked at how we can not be seen as the department of no and recognizing maybe some of the ways our department has frustrated our organization has really led to a really good response. And so a lot of what I'm going to share has been impactful in our organization since writing this blog and since connecting with all of our other team members about how we can improve as a department and as an awareness program. And so one of the things I also want to hit is that in many studies, there's different percentages, but it has been shown that up to 90% of our decisions are based on emotion. And so if we're not careful, sometimes, and we kind of saw this in BJ Fogg's presentation earlier today, if we're not careful, sometimes we tend to think that just sending information or even logic is enough to change someone's behavior. And that's not the case, especially when we see that up to 90% of our decisions are based on emotion. And so this really means that having effective emotional intelligence is key to helping people make the decisions we want them to make and have the behavior we want them to make. And so before I go further, I just want to really clarify, high level, what is emotional intelligence? And according to Daniel Goleman, there are 5 key components to emotional intelligence. There's self-awareness, empathy, motivation, self-regulation, and social skills. And during this presentation, I'm not going to dig in super in depth to what all of these are. I want to encourage you to take some emotional intelligence training and do some research on your own as well. But what I am going to do is look at all of these 5 key components and break them down in really, really helpful ways that we've learned how to use these to drive and mature our awareness program to better manage human risk. And so another really interesting fact is that according to researchers, over 90% of high-performing individuals have high emotional intelligence. And this fact is actually what started to make me wonder, okay, if over 90% of high-performing individuals have high emotional intelligence, maybe the same thing is true about high-performing security awareness programs. What if over 90% of our high-performing security awareness programs also have high emotional intelligence? And so I started to dig into this and try to discover, how can we improve our emotional intelligence as an awareness program, as a cybersecurity department, and in some ways, even as an organization overall. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can use emotional intelligence to create high performing awareness programs that enable us to better manage human risk. So I'm going to talk about two different things. One, we're going to talk about using emotional intelligence to build, evaluate, and drive awareness programs. And we'll look at those 5 key components and how we've found helpful ways to help that drive us. And then also some interesting ways that we've learned how to categorize and present metrics using some of these emotional intelligence categories. And I really do believe that awareness programs can use all 5 main categories of emotional intelligence, also known as EQ, whether it's self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and then also social skills and empathy. So with that, we'll go ahead and get into evaluating and maturing your awareness program using emotional intelligence. So awareness programs, I think are highly effective when you can build better self-awareness. And this was something that was really challenging for us. But one of the first steps that we took was this process where we ask, listen, and adapt. So the first thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to ask around our organization, what is our perception? How do people perceive us? Are we performing well? And are our processes working? And we listen to that feedback, and then we adapt and we continue that cycle. And these 3 P's here, performance, perception, and process, are the 3 key elements that we have found are really helpful to us to understand, our self-awareness and whether or not it's actually being effective. And I'll give an example. If we have a high-performing e-learning module that might be phenomenal at talking about phishing and how to avoid clicking on a link, and maybe people even perceive that module to be really great. Anyone that's taken it has given us phenomenal feedback. If our process is not effective, meaning maybe it's not actually getting deployed to the right people at the right time, maybe we actually need to realize that something does need to change, and we need to put a better process in place for deploying that module. And in the same way, maybe our perception isn't good. Maybe people don't perceive us to be doing things that they really care about or really impact them. Or maybe our performance isn't good. Maybe we're not focusing on our top risks. Maybe we're doing things that we think are really fun. If you have a good perception, that doesn't always mean you have the right processes or the right performance. And that's what we have found to be true. We need to focus on all of these aspects to understand our organization and understand our awareness program and try to learn where we can get better. And sometimes that might be done through surveys. Sometimes that's done through one-on-one conversations. And sometimes that's done through looking at data and understanding, are people actually doing what you want them to do? And then secondly, there's this idea of self-regulation, and this can be interpreted in a number of ways. But I'm going to give you a couple of things that we've done that have really helped us. And number one, that's schedule evaluations of effectiveness. One of the things that I've found often as individuals that run awareness programs, we tend to have a lot of different skill sets. We're multi-talented. Sometimes we have a multitude of things on our roles. Maybe awareness is just one element to what we do in our organization. And often all of the different work that we're involved in, we kind of forget to maybe actually schedule time where we effectively and honestly evaluate our program, see if it's actually effective. We've started to actually schedule time quarterly where we look at how effective is our awareness program internally, just as an awareness team. Because if we don't do that often, we might be told maybe our awareness program isn't being effective by a leader, when maybe we could have scheduled an evaluation. And when we do schedule those evaluations, we're looking at these 3 things. We're looking at, what is our vision? Do we have roadmaps? Do we have a clear end goal that's constantly moving forward as we achieve things? Are we addressing our top risks? And then just like I said, our awareness program leaders, all of us are very multi-talented. We have different skill sets. And it's important to remember that we all have limited bandwidth. Whenever you say yes to something, you're actually saying no to something else. You don't have an unlimited capacity to get work done. And so we're also trying to regulate our team, and we're trying to look at how much bandwidth do we have per month, per quarter, per year. Are the things that we're being asked to do legitimate? Are they even security awareness focused? And are there things that we should remove so that we can actually be focusing on our long-term goals? And then thirdly, there's motivation, and there's a lot of key elements to, motivation. And one of the things I'll just call out, many of you might have been familiar with Simon Sinek, who is an amazing thought leader in leadership. And he has an amazing book out called The Golden Circle, and it's all about finding your why. And motivation, I would say, within emotional intelligence and building your awareness program comes down to two key elements. Are you helping motivate the employees in your organization to be behind conscious, good behaviors around security? But then also, is your awareness team motivated? Like, is your awareness team fully behind the why? And is your why attractive to your organization? What we've learned is that how motivation works is different based on the context of someone's role, based on the content that they might need based on their role. And then also, every department responds differently. We have focused often on this push versus pull marketing strategy. In some cases, to increase motivation, we might need to push content out. In other cases, maybe we need to put in some sort of prompt where we can pull people in. And often, the reasons why we give behind behavioral change, the why behind it is going to be phrased, it's going to be explained differently depending on the department, depending on the role, depending on the individual, especially when it comes down to leaders versus individual contributors versus people that are highly technical versus people that are not highly technical. We need to understand that our why should be attractive, not just to our organization, but also to our cybersecurity department, to other departments, to our own team members. And there's a lot of different ways you can improve motivation. But I think the first step is really being able to identify, what is your actual why? Why do you care about doing security awareness? Does your organization buy that? And what are some ways you can adjust that based on the context of someone's role, the content that you might send to them? And, have you considered using push versus pull strategies to try to increase motivation? Fourthly, we have social skills and empathy. And one of the ways that we've really developed this is through networking. We grow in understanding other people's perspectives. One of the things I did when I first joined Blue Yonder and became their information security awareness ambassador was simply job shadowing and learning about other cultures. We're a global company. Many organizations represented here are probably also global. And even if you're not global, you still have a variety of cultures in your organization. And one of the best ways to develop connections is just simply job shadowing others in your organization. If your cybersecurity department is only connecting with people when there's a problem, you're going to be perceived really poorly because people are going to think, I'm being messaged by the cybersecurity department, I must have done something wrong. We try to break that because we don't want that perception. We want people to genuinely know we genuinely care. And so one of the best ways we've developed these connections is through job shadows. We've learned about gaps where our awareness program, our department can come in and make things better for the people in those departments. And we've just genuinely had a great time being able to connect with people across the organization. We've really developed amazing relationships. And I think ultimately this comes down to meeting your organization where it is at. We can't just assume the impact of changes. And we have to remember that we can't just be focused on compliance. We also have to be focused on behavior. To be honest and to be realistic, a lot of our compliance training is not always going to equate to behavior change. And I think, we've seen that throughout today and throughout, this summit when we talk about behavior. Our compliance training is really important. We want to maintain compliance so that we can continue business operations, but we can't just walk into a meeting or walk into, learning about someone's role or addressing a problem and assume that just because maybe they completed their compliance training, that they're fully equipped, that they're being prompted, that they have the ability and the motivation to act the way that we want them to do. And so that's where empathy really comes into play. And when we meet our organization where it is at, we're not just meeting with them when there's problems. We're actually meeting with them to learn about their roles because people love to talk about what they do. And I think, if you started to job shadow people in your organization just to learn about them and to get to know them, not just to talk about security, but to literally just genuinely get to know them and care about them, you're going to have a stronger perception, influence, and impact within your organization. And then, lastly on here, do we have strong and consistent communication? That doesn't just mean, are you actually sending out emails? Email communication in many organizations is just used way too much. Too many emails are going out. People ignore email. If you're measuring if you have consistent communication by the amount of emails you're sending out, that's probably not an actual indicator if it's strong and consistent and actually effective. You need to evaluate, are there other vehicles that you can use to communicate? And how can you embed empathy within the ways that you communicate? We try to emphasize empathy through everything that we do in all of our interactions, because that really warrants a much better response. Even if someone makes a mistake, we have to understand that we're all human beings that are imperfect. We all will occasionally make mistakes, and we have to be able to use empathy when that happens. And a really good example of this that I want to highlight is just through a story, a situation that we had in our organization, where we basically had decided as a cybersecurity department, we're going to turn off USB access, because if we do that, we will be creating a more secure organization. And certainly that might be true, but we kind of came back at that and said, you know what? If we do this, we actually think there might be an impact. And our cybersecurity department kind of thought, no, like no one really is using USBs. And the only situations we've found so far are ones that have negative impact, right? Maybe it's a security concern, someone bypassed security controls, so we need to shut it off. And we said, let us investigate this. And so our awareness team and our awareness program went into the organization, actually found use cases where people were using USBs that needed to be enabled. And had we gone in and actually shut it off, we could have actually created a massive incident across our organization. And I just want to highlight this because often our awareness programs are set up to become a bridge between the rest of our organization and our cybersecurity department. Turning something off as simple as USB access can maybe create a more safe and healthy environment from a security perspective. But at the same time, if we do that and we don't actually check to see if there's impact, then there could be a way bigger issue on our hands, especially if people start to get frustrated with our cybersecurity department and they actually start circumventing issues. And that kind of goes back to the story I shared at the beginning, where there was this leader that was known as, Dr. No, saying no to every initiative in the organization due to cybersecurity concerns. What happens when we do that is people will start to just say, you know what, why would I even bother talking to the cybersecurity department? I think that at the end of the day, maybe I'll just circumvent security controls because it's easier. We want to become someone that enables the business to work in a more secure way, not disabling the business from doing the things that they need to do. And I think one of the best opportunities that we have is to be able to be a more effective bridge between the rest of the organization and our cybersecurity department. And remember too, emotional intelligence isn't just about knowing the human, it's also about knowing your humans. Every organization is different. Every organization has different cultures, different backgrounds. Every industry works a little differently. Turning off USB access in one organization might be okay, whereas in another organization, it might not be okay. And so you need to take time to invest in your organization and know the people that you work with. Understanding emotional intelligence at a high level and behavior at a high level is really important. But the more that you can get to know the people in your own organizations, the better you're going to be able to make decisions about what to do. And I think that's at the core of emotional intelligence, is simply developing real relationships that highlight genuine care and empathy for the people you're working with. So the last thing I want to talk about is categorizing your metrics using emotional intelligence. And so using emotional intelligence for security metrics, and I'll kind of break this down talking about quantitative metrics and qualitative. So on this slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the quantitative metrics we're using and kind of key components of EQ. And before I kind of break this down, I'll just say that emotional intelligence is continuing to be popular. Organizations are, assigning training even to all of their staff around emotional intelligence. And we have found that using emotional intelligence to highlight our security metrics enables us to kind of speak the language of other departments in more impactful ways. And so here are some examples of some of the quantitative metrics we've kind of broken down and categorized using emotional intelligence. And when we think of self-awareness, we've looked at security awareness surveys. How is the perception of cybersecurity in the organization and our awareness program? We try to identify top risks with clear data, along with some of the actions we might be taking to mitigate that. through measuring and sharing impact metrics. We might look at some of our educational simulated phishing campaigns that we're running, incidents, or other things related to that. Self-regulation, we actually maintain records of scheduled time where we do vision casting. We have visible roadmaps ready to share. If someone said, what is the future of your awareness program? Well, here it is, right? And we're constantly evaluating that. It changes. It doesn't remain the same January 1st to December 31st. It changes throughout the year. We also need to measure bandwidth. How many hours are we able to work on awareness content? If a request comes in, remember, if we say yes to something, we're also saying no to something else. And if we're not regulating ourselves, we might overpromise and underdeliver something simply because we weren't prepared. And then motivation, we measure contests, recognitions, awards. We try to measure engagement scores and activity. That might include through blog post views, video views, engagements. Maybe we put a form or a question at the end of something so we can see how long someone actually engaged with something. These are all key aspects to what we do for quantitative metrics. And then we also look at qualitative metrics, and these are more narrative driven. Maybe they don't all have numbers assigned to them, but they're still really important to highlight. So when we think of highlighting social skills, we look at measuring networking and collaboration. How much engagement activity have we had via communication tools? Have people been reporting incidents? Do we have records of some of the email communications we've had where someone found a security issue that we were able to address because they brought it up to us? And we try to highlight empathy through narrative highlights. Who have we helped this week? Who brought greater clarity and understanding? And then also just trying to be more honest about where can our perception and influence grow. I think it's really important to understand that if all you're doing is sending in metrics that are numerical, often when everything's going well, we have a hard time justifying our cybersecurity department. But then when an issue occurs, we immediately start running in with a bunch of funding for it. And I think the more that we can try to highlight narrative highlights through our metrics and through the things that we're sharing with leaders, we can start to share impact that might not be seen in the numbers initially, but hopefully they'll be able to see the impact overall. And we've certainly experienced that as an organization. And so as I wrap up, one of the things that we really stress is that effective security creates value and trust. And we stress this whenever we do live awareness training in our organization. And I would even say effective emotional intelligence also creates value and trust. It's all about valuing people for who they are and meeting them where they are so that they can trust you, which you in turn eventually can trust them even more with the behaviors and things that they're going to do because they're more fully bought in maybe to the awareness program and the why around actually doing the things that we need to do to keep our organization more secure. So 3 action items as we wrap up. Number 1, we talked a lot about building greater self-awareness for your program. Think about where you can improve your EQ personally and think honestly about, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Schedule an evaluation of your program today. If you are not already routinely checking in, actually looking at how effective is your program? Do you need to change your roadmaps? Do you need to change your planning? Are your goals really what they should be? Evaluate it. Don't wait. Schedule it today. Schedule it for next week or later today even. Look at how you can use emotional intelligence to understand and value your organization. Network with others, understand your culture, and identify security selling points for people in different roles. Because remember, the way that we explain our why and the way that we get people motivated is going to look different based on the things that they do and the understanding they have. Schedule a job shadow with someone. We've done job shadows as short as 15 minutes to as long as an hour. It doesn't have to be really complex, but just meet with someone, understand their role, get to know them. You'll be surprised at how much you can learn, not just about their role, but about your organization and what security gaps you might have by doing that. And then consider displaying your metrics using EQ categorizations. Like I said, this has been very impactful to us as an organization. And you might want to think about what qualitative metrics or narratives can you add to demonstrate EQ. If you don't already have narratives, what narratives can you put in? And if you're having a hard time thinking about what narratives, maybe you need to back up and think about, where can you improve how you connect with your organization in ways that go beyond just numerical values. And then, what would make others outside of security care more about your impact data? This is really important. If your security leaders care about your metrics, but the people in other departments like maybe HR or even your CEO don't quite understand the impact data, what are some ways you can make that more understandable, impactful, and valuable for them? And I think using emotional intelligence might just be one way that you'll be able to do that. And so as I close, I just want to end with this quote. And I think this really relates to everything that emotional intelligence is really trying to do. And that's the only way to change someone's mind is to connect with them from the heart. And we've learned this in our organization time and time again. The more that we actually take time to meet people where they're at and understand them and connect with them, the more they're able to help us create a more safe and secure organization. And I think as we use emotional intelligence to do that, it can be incredibly impactful. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. I literally just have chills from so many things that you said. I took notes for myself. But this last quote, you remind me of a quote. So my mother is German. I speak German. There's a quote out there saying, when you speak someone's like native language, you speak to their heart. And I feel like it's applicable because you're talking about getting to know your people and being able to see to see their perspectives and their worldviews so you can better speak to them. Seriously, just chills. There's so much good chatter going on in your hallway. I'm super excited for when you roll over there in Slack. One of the questions that we had from Rula Richardson's was, first of all, love and compliments all around. Love this talk, Corwin. Thank you so much. What she's curious about is how you used self-awareness to assess your programs. What are some of the questions that were really hard for you to ask yourself? And of those answers, which were the hardest to act on?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the hardest questions to ask that we've started to ask more consistently as an awareness program and as a department is, who do we frustrate the most? Honestly, security can be really frustrating. And often what will happen is we might view a department as really difficult to work with, or someone's just impossible. They just are always resistant to security change. We have to ask ourselves, who do we frustrate most? And try to put ourselves in their shoes, or ask them honestly, hey, you know what? I know that we're frustrating. I need you to tell me how we can improve. That's really hard feedback to take sometimes. Sometimes it can feel personal. Sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes it's just about, you know what? Security sometimes has recommendations or requirements that people do have to kind of get on board with. But I think that's probably the most difficult question to ask. And I think secondly, the other difficult part to ask is individually, what are my weaknesses? What am I, sometimes more naturally avoiding? And I think sometimes that can really help, because sometimes if I find myself avoiding conflict, for example, maybe I'm going to not engage with a department the way that I should. And so who do we frustrate most? And then try to think honestly about your weaknesses. And I think those are the two most difficult questions that we have come across that have been impactful for us when we actually take the time to answer them.
No, that's great. Not only having the self-awareness of what is going on with everyone else, but reflecting that back onto yourself.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I have for you, because I think that we have all been in this position where I think that there's something about security awareness, because we're so people-centric, that tends to draw people with high emotional intelligences. When you said how many good security awareness programs have high EQ, like I literally got chills. I'm wondering for you, what your experience has been trying to bring the security team aboard with this, because I know I personally run into conflict where security is like, no, this is what we do. And I'm like, cool, but there's a way to massage our approach to actually help make us all more successful.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll be honest, one of the first steps to this was organizationally, we actually sent out emotional intelligence training to the entire organization. LinkedIn Learning has some amazing courses. That was a requirement from HR, and we sent that out. And that was kind of step one. Step two was telling our department, if they felt another team was difficult to work with, or communication had to be sent out, giving pushback with using like these emotional intelligence key categories to help them understand why we might need to change what we've done historically. And then also, I think the other key element to this is trying to, help people understand that when people value security, our security department feels really good. But often our security departments might feel tempted to just stop right there, right? Like, we're only caring about if people care about what we do, but we don't care about what other people do. And that's not always necessarily, the case, right? But sometimes we can find ourselves, unintentionally there as a department. And so we've been trying to help people understand, here are some ways that we can improve this. And here are some reasons why we need to get back on board. And we've had our leaders behind this. And I think that's been key as well, as having that executive support and organizational support as we make these types of initiatives.
I love that collaboration with HR and helping to use other business functions to really help highlight the importance, as well as getting that senior leadership and buy-in. Timothy Thatcher commented that security must be balanced with the business needs. And I would say even further, to your point, security should be a partner with the business, right? That we are here to help you do what you need to do and to keep and to innovate and empower and to keep running. Very last question for you. We're almost out of time. Marissa Fagan asked, do you have any executives that practice EQ and self-awareness? You mentioned you have that leadership and buy-in. How did you get them to adopt this mindset? How did you get that senior support?
Yeah. So, we have started to kind of spread this out to more executives. We actually have some presentations next week where we're going to present this more to executives. I think one of the biggest ways we've gotten people to be on board is through the results. As our awareness program has taken time to actually meet with people and try to showcase empathy, our perception of cybersecurity, even if our department hasn't been fully on board with everything yet, and organizationally, everyone's still learning, right? Our perception has improved. And we've been able to take those results individually when we meet with people and say, hey, look, this is what happens when you take time to use emotional intelligence. You're giving empathy, you're genuinely caring. Look at what can happen. And I think that is the best way. Leaders respond really good to results, and that's how we've been able to get people on board. So
I love it. I hope that you guys loved Corwin as much as I do, from the chatter in the Slack as well as the questions. I know that you did. The link for feedback for our first two speakers for the day was dropped in the chat. Please feel free to click on that just so they can know what you liked. And Corwin, I know for me personally, I have more to say, so I will definitely be reaching out. Thank you so much.
all right. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you.